Today we are in Hampton, South Carolina. It is Saturday, and J.A. is going to be speaking about his father. I'm grateful to be here sharing that with him. I know he's going to do great.
And we're gonna shout, yeah, trouble's over, by and by, come over here, where the table is spread, and the feast of the Lord is going on, and we're gonna drink from the fountain and never run dry.
I am not nervous. I am not nervous. 62 times, I am not nervous. Those are words that are featured in this book that I found of my father's during the Civil Rights Movement. You know, my father was the first NAACP president for Hampton County. 62 times he had to tell himself he was not nervous. Think about that for a second. This was back in the early 60s, and my dad was in his 30s. He was around my age. He was not nervous. And you know, one of the reasons why he was not nervous is because he had with him his family. So to help me not be nervous, I'm asking that my brothers come up on stage with me if you don't mind. Brothers. Brothers, give it up for the brothers. I am not nervous. Brother Barry, Brother Rodney, Brother Jamar, and Brother Reggie. We are not nervous. And see, most of y'all knew my dad. There's a lot more of us that could make it today. But I think today is important, and I appreciate the invitation to come today because a lot of times in life we have these unsung heroes that you can't Google. You can't look up and find a lot of information about them, but these are the people. These are the individuals that without them, movement would not have happened. My neighbor growing up, Mr. Haygood, said it right. It's not about getting a pat on your back. It's not about someone telling you well done until the man upstairs tell you well done. And so I was thinking about these words that my father wrote so many years ago, decades before I was born. I am not nervous. It takes courage. And so when I was looking for some inspiration for tonight, I went where only I knew to go. I went to the Bible. I'm from rural South Carolina like y'all. I'm from right up the road. So I went to the Bible and I came across Psalms 56. And if there's any ministers in the audience, please excuse me if I have to look down at my notes, but it's in my heart. It's Psalms 56, verses 3 through 4. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, I will trust in God. I will not be afraid. What can mortal man do to me? I am not nervous. Amen? And so right now what I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of a verbal history of what my father did. My father was born in 1930. My father at the age of 14, believe it or not, can you believe that? Joined the Marine Corps. At 14, how many 14-year-olds we got in the audience right now? Anybody 14? 14 years old, he had the courage to leave home, to leave rural South Carolina. And see, he didn't know at the time what he was doing would be historic. He just knew that he wanted a better life for himself and wanted to come back and provide for his beloved mother. And so during that time, segregation was still happening. And so he joined the Marine Corps. And the only way he could join the Marine Corps had to be a part of these special group of Marines, the Marshall Point Marines. And I am so honored today to have the Marshall Point Marines here today, and especially one in particular. All of y'all are amazing, but Elijah Abram, he's taking a picture right now, but Elijah, please stand up for just a second. See, give it up. See, my father had this special ability to build lasting, loving relationships with people. And Mr. Abram, my father, loved you. He thought so highly of you. And seeing you here today is so humbling to me. I thank you for the friendship that you gave my father at the end of his life. Thank you, sir. And so let me get back to it. So my father ended up being a Marshall Point Marines, one of the first group of African-American Marines in the country. He didn't know he was being historic. He had to get something done. Eventually came back home after serving his country honorably and looking for work. And eventually, years later, I think it was 1959, if I believe, if I'm correct, somewhere around that time, that he started working at Westinghouse. I remember that plant that was over there that closed almost 4 or 5 years ago. That's another conversation we have to have about economic opportunities here in Hampton. That's for another day. But we need to have that conversation. But so he started working at Westinghouse, and a few years go by, and he realizes that there's an injustice happening. A group of them, wasn't just him. And so they started organizing, and see, their issue then was that women weren't allowed to work in the office. They weren't allowing women to work, African-American women, to work in the office. And so he said, we got to do something. And so they got in contact with a gentleman by the name of I.D. Quincy Newman, the Reverend I.D. Quincy Newman. And so I.D. was a field director for the NAACP for South Carolina. And he came down and they were organizing, and everybody was getting excited and everybody was getting pumped up. And he comes to this meeting and he's about to leave, and my dad gets up and says something to him. He said, I.D., you can't just be coming here getting us all riled up and then leaving. We need you to be a leader. You need to be here. And my I.D. looks at my dad and said, James, you are that leader. You don't need me to lead your family and friends, but you are that leader. And so begrudgingly, my dad did what he had to do. And they organized, and they started the first chapter of the NAACP here in Hampton County. Later on, they would go on and with a group of nameless people, so many of them, to make it happen, they organized this organization called the Hampton County Betterment for Poor People. The Committee for the Betterment of Poor People. And this organization was incredible. So I hear the story about how they got some of their first funding. My dad, once again, I am not nervous. He gets a meeting with Senator Strom Thurmond. And we know the history of Strom Thurmond. We know that history. He meets with him. He got a 30-minute meeting with him. He leaves out 3 hours later with a $50,000 grant. He worked on the legal pad. $50,000 recurring grant. And see what this grant did was it was during the time that we were integrating the schools here in South Carolina, and this grant was like a supplemental program to integrate the middle school kids, African American middle school kids, into the high schools. And I can keep going on in details and details, but my father was not nervous. He continued the legacy of civil rights, and he continued the legacy of public service throughout his entire life. Not looking for a pat on the back, Mr. Haygood. He wasn't looking for that. It just had to be done. He wasn't looking for any accolades. There wasn't no Twitter or YouTube back then. He wasn't tweeting anything. He was just getting it done. My older brothers behind me, they were in that struggle with him. They were there with him the whole way. They were not nervous. And at the end of his life, and now this right here is the most powerful piece. This is how God works. End of his life, he gets a Congressional Gold Medal with the Malcolm Marines. He was sick at the time. He was sick. He had cancer. And so he goes to his doctor and he says, look, I need to be in D.C. Obama was president. Thought he never would see that. He said, I need to be in D.C. And he somehow, through the grace of God, was able to get himself well enough for the doctor to give him clearance to take that trip. Came back home, I believe, was on a Sunday. He died by that Tuesday. He wasn't looking for a pat on the back. But it was in that moment that God said, well done, my faithful servant. Your work here is done. Let's think about that for a second. He didn't do it for the accolades. But God told him the work was done. So what I'm tasking everyone that can hear my voice, are you nervous? Are you nervous? Everybody, please repeat after me. I am not nervous.
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 62 times we are not nervous. So if there's work that needs to be done, we need to get up and do that work. Because my father's legacy will not be fulfilled if we all don't continue the legacy. You can't be nervous. You can't worry about, oh, well, I got a job, I don't have time. You can't worry about, well, someone else needs to do it. You can't be nervous. It takes 80 hours a week to get stuff done. You got to work 40. You got to work 40 hours. You got to pay bills. The other 40 hours, you need to be out here doing something. Leaving a legacy for these kids that are in the audience. It's not about us. I'm starting to get some visible gray hair. It ain't about me no more. I'm not nervous, y'all. And I'm hoping none of y'all in this audience is nervous. We need to get some stuff done. We'll have conversations about, we talk about economic issues here, but we got some work to do, y'all. This Hampton's my home. There's a lot of work to be done. And Representative Bowers, what I would ask you to do, you go back to the State House, and I would ask if you talk to my dad's dear friend, Representative Lonnie Host, and Senator Matthews, and a countless number of the other ones. And we need a tree also dedicated to James A. Moore. Amen? That's my task to you, Representative, if you don't mind. Thank y'all so much.